Good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this session. Before I get into the detail about today, just a little bit of a recap and background on the broader work that this sits amongst. So today we're going to be looking specifically at offences and penalties in Northern Ireland in relation to the application of the EU regulation there. This is all part of a wider piece of work that you are hopefully all quite familiar with by this stage. Many of you may have been at our briefing meeting in October, in which we're reviewing the UK batteries legislation, by which we refer to the Batteries and Accumulators Regulations 2008 and the Waste Batteries and Accumulators Regulations 2009. In order to improve the functioning of the existing regime, maximise the opportunity for greater circularity and sustainability. And I guess this is the key focus today: full implementation of the EU batteries regulation in Northern Ireland due to its inclusion in the Windsor framework. Can I have the next slide, please, Eleanor? Our objectives today then are to set out our proposed approach to offences and penalties in relation to placing on the market, conformity assessment, the battery passport, and the due diligence aspects of the EU batteries regulation, which we are collectively referring to as the POM, or placing on the market requirements. This is part of the consultative process that we need to undergo in order to lay legislation to bring those offences and penalties into law. The offences and penalties relating to the EU batteries regulation, Chapter 8 on the management of waste batteries, are out of scope for today's session. We want to gather your views on our proposed approach to offences and penalties. As Joe's already set out, please use the chat function as you wish. We will attempt to reply directly in there where we can. Where we can't, we'll take those questions away, and we're more than happy, the team is more than happy to address any further questions in follow-up. We will try and come back to everybody on any points raised. You also have the opportunity to put your hand up and ask a question live. Come off mute and put your camera on and speak, which we would also welcome. Following the session today, conscious that we're setting out proposals for the first time for you all, we will follow up with a summary of what's been discussed and the option and sufficient time to actually consider what we're setting out today in a bit more detail, and come back to us in writing in slightly longer time in order to top and tail this part of the legislative process, the consultative aspect. Eleanor, if you could move us on one slide, thank you. Okay, so as I think everybody is almost certainly aware, the EU batteries regulation applies directly in Northern Ireland under the Windsor framework. A statutory instrument is required in order to fully implement the POM, placing on the market requirements of the EU batteries regulation in Northern Ireland. And that statutory instrument will need to do a couple of key things. Firstly, set out the penalties that will apply in respect of any infringements of the EU batteries regulation in Northern Ireland. And secondly, set out the powers for regulators to use to support the compliance regime in Northern Ireland under the EU batteries regulation. Thanks, Eleanor. So specifically, the articles that we're referring to and the chapters that we're referring to, which will create an offence under the EU batteries regulation, are listed out here. So I recognise that there'll be different areas of interest amongst those who have joined today in some of these parts of the regulation, but I'm going to list them out. The chapters and articles in scope for offences and penalties that we are discussing today and putting forward proposals in relation to are the general provisions in that's Articles 4 and 5, sustainability and safety requirements as they are set out in Articles 6 to 12, which includes restriction of substances, carbon footprint, recycled content, performance and durability, removability and replaceability, and the safety of stationary battery energy storage systems. Further to those, the labelling and information requirements, which are set out in Articles 13 and 14, the requirements which set up conformity assessment for batteries covered through Articles 15 and 17 to 20, the wider obligations for economic operators in Articles 38 to 46, and those economic operators include manufacturers, suppliers, authorised representatives, importers, distributors, and fulfilment service providers. We also, in scope of our definition of POM, is the due diligence requirements as set out in Articles 48 to 50 and 52, as well as the battery passport, the digital battery passport in 77, 78, and finally, the market surveillance and safeguarding procedures, which are set out in Articles 79 and 81. If we could move forward a slide, please. To move into a little bit more description of the approach that we have taken here in determining penalty groups and penalties that will apply, certain articles of the EU regulation create an obligation to not put a battery on the market unless it meets certain requirements, and we're referring to these in some cases as standards, as opposed to being actual requirements that carry an offence or penalty. The articles that we're referring to specifically here are those between 6 and 10 and 12 to 14, whereas other articles in the regulation are the articles that actually require the compliance with that standard and will have a penalty or offence attached to those as well. We could move forward a slide, please. So the approach that we have taken is to review all of the articles in scope of this statutory instrument and make decisions applying a consistent logic as to what the level of penalty should be that applies to a particular type of offence or penalty. And we propose 3 penalty groups, which go up in terms of the maximum severity of penalty. The lowest possible level of offence is 0.1, summary conviction, which is a fine not exceeding level 5. Essentially, that replicates what we have in the batteries placing on the market regulation at the moment at the lowest level, and is designed to be the quickest route to being able to apply a penalty for less significant breaches of the regulation, potentially those that relate to administrative or information-based type offences or aspects of non-compliance. Number 2 is also taken from the batteries placing on the market regulation 2008, so replicates across, and is an either way offence where there can be a fine or there can be a conviction, and that's intended for a middle group, which is not the lowest in terms of severity of non-compliance, but is neither the highest either. And then finally, the worst, or at least the most significant type of offence that we have created a group for is any aspect that relates to safety, or that we deem to relate to safety in terms of the requirements of the EU regulation. That would potentially carry up to 12 months imprisonment or a fine not exceeding £20,000. Eleanor, if we could move on, please. Thank you. So our rationale, as I've highlighted to some extent already, the proposed penalties set out are based on the existing penalties in the current batteries regulation 2008. Penalties 1 and 2 come across directly from BPOM respectively, and we've applied the exact same logic to the articles in the EU regulation. Penalty 3 is the most serious, and we propose that this is used for any articles which relate directly to safety. Thanks, Eleanor. We could move on. So that brings us to the key questions that we would like to ask of you today, and that is whether you have any thoughts or disagree with the rationale behind these penalty groups, whether you think that the proposed penalties are proportionate, and any other comments or views regarding these proposed penalties and the groupings that we're proposing. And as I mentioned at the start, we would welcome any comments and thoughts on these questions now, or any other thoughts on the topic we're discussing today that stakeholders and those in attendance would like to raise. But just as a reminder, we will be following this call with a written request for further input, which will set out the full list of articles and the penalty group that each has been ascribed to, asking for you to take those away and consider, and come back to us in longer time with any further thoughts on those. I'll put the questions slide back up in a moment, but just to also cover off our next steps, we are in the drafting process now for this statutory instrument, and we're seeking your views to incorporate into the drafting of that statutory instrument, and this is part of the consultative process in order for us to be able to lay that legislation. We will be sending out a written opportunity for further views on these proposed offences and penalties in follow-up to this meeting. And if we could skip back to the questions slide, please, Eleanor, that would be great. Going to leave that on screen and hand over to anyone who would like to come in. Please do raise your hand or continue to put questions in the chat.